And I'm gonna start recording. So I know we've got a few folks who are really excited to join us today who weren't able to make the time work. So we'll make sure we've got a link to everyone afterwards and send that out. Welcome for everybody new who's just joining in. We're so excited for this panel this morning. So please feel free to call out in the chat where you're calling in from. We'd love to know all the different places. All right. We've got about 40 people on the line. I know we have over 100 folks registered for today's webinar. So we'll give a couple more minutes for folks to come on in. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. And we'll kick things off at 11:35. Give folks a few minutes to wrap up other Zoom calls or meetings and join us today. And if you're just joining in, please call out in the chat where you're calling in from. We'd love to know where folks are from. I know we've got on the phone or on the panel today, we've got someone from Uganda, from Sacramento, and from Brooklyn. So we've already got a wide range of time zones and geographies. I have a feeling we might have women from all over the world with us today. All right, we've got about 50 people on the call. Thank you all for folks who just joined in. Feel free to call out in the chat where you're calling in from. We're gonna get started in just a couple of minutes. We've got over 100 people who RSVP, so I'm just gonna give about one more minute for those folks to trickle in. All right. Cool. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm gonna kick us off this morning. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in today. My name is Lisa Curtis. I'm the founder and CEO of Kuli Kuli, and I'm so honored to be the moderator for today's panel. We have such incredible women who I can't wait for you all to meet. So I will go ahead and introduce them and then let them take it away from here. So first we've got Rochelle Robinette. So Rochelle is an herbalist, holistic health practitioner, and founder of Supernatural. What a cool name, Supernatural. I want to go there already, which is both a wellness company, a cafe, and a platform dedicated to plant-based health for awesome wellness. Her work includes one-on-one coaching, online workshops, events, and a shop, and more. Thank you for joining us, Michelle. Next, we've got Pamela Anyoti Peronaci. Pamela, did I pronounce all that right?
Peronaci.
Sorry about that. Who is the amazing founder and CEO of Asante Mama. She's an award-winning social entrepreneur. And she works with over 11,000 farmers in Uganda who produce moringa and other botanical herbs. She supports these farmer livelihoods by linking them to markets and creating a full circle effect between moringa farmers and moringa consumers. So thank you, Pamela. We're honored to be partnering with her and her team to sell her high quality moringa in the US. Last but not least, we have Dr. Carrie Waterman. So she is a moringa researcher at UC Davis. She's focused on understanding the nutritional and phytochemical properties of moringa and other plants. And she has been working with moringa farmers in Kenya and California for improved production and income generation. So welcome, Carrie. Great. So we are at an interesting point in our world today where we know that, this coronavirus crisis, the pandemic is really sweeping all over the world, and there's nobody who is untouched. And I think nobody who is feeling this pandemic more greatly than the women of the world. And so, in honor of Women's Health Week and in honor of, all that women do, we wanted to bring together 3 incredible women who can share perspectives, from science, from herbalism, from actually farming and growing botanicals, to really talk to us a little bit about what they see in their community and what, building energy and immunity for women means to them. And, one fun fact and article that's been at least circulating around my network is they say that, 50% of men say that right now, they're doing half of the housework and the childcare during this pandemic, and that 3% of women agree with that statement. So without further ado, would love to kick it off with Dr. Carrie Waterman. Carrie, can you tell us a little bit about how the pandemic is affecting you and how you think about energy and immunity for women during this challenging time?
Sure. I can speak both just personally and then as a researcher. I think that, what's challenging is that they're really uncertain times, and that can cause, a lot of stress. And we're in very new situations where before we had, already been struggling a bit with a work-life balance. And now those things are all in one place, family, children, work, and yourself kind of. So I think that it's, this effort to kind of find balance between those things, have compassion for ourselves. I think it helps to know that other women are going through things. I have one child and it's hard. And when I talk to a mother of 3 or 5 or more, it puts things into perspective to know many people are struggling with these things. And I think that women, we naturally take on a lot, and that can feel like a heavy weight. And so, what are the tools we can use to feel empowered, to feel strong? And I think that can help with just our habits and our diet, certainly. And just to, be compassionate with ourselves,
Awesome, thank you. So Rochelle, would love to turn it over to you. One of the things you said in preparation for this call was that some of the women you work with actually think they're healthier now than they were sort of pre-pandemic quarantine life, which seems like a kind of an ironic thing to say right now. Can you talk about that a little bit more and how you're seeing kind of the health of women in your community?
Yeah, definitely. I think, or I know that the women that mentioned that are mothers, and cold and flu season and winters and having children in school and, together with each other was always a difficult time for, kids' health and then the health of the whole family. And, in that sense, quarantine's actually been working because it's been, preventing everybody getting sick and getting mom sick, and it just being this endless cycle. And, those people that I see that are, or the women that I see that are not mothers, what I see as the themes right now are a real interest, a renewed interest, or maybe sometimes an initial interest in really understanding the mechanisms of immunity and energy and, healthcare, preventative care, and wanting to understand it as a way to take responsibility for their own health and the health of the household. It's an earnestness that is, that wasn't always there before. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It is something that a lot of us are focused on. Pamela, can you talk a little bit about you and the amazing women farmers you work with in Uganda? I think a lot of people are, sitting here in the U.S. and it feels like a world away, and would love to understand what is it like for rural women farmers in Uganda right now?
Yes, Lisa, thank you so much for organizing this webinar, and I'm really excited to be here. I must say that at the beginning of the lockdown, it was really a shock. I personally was in total shock and denial, and I was lost. I'm living in Belgium now. I'm in Brussels right now, and I just got back from Uganda 2 days before the lockdown was actually announced here. And when my elder son is in the UK, my second son is in Italy, in Rome. I am here with my daughter, and my team is in Uganda, and the rest of my family there. So it's been, it was almost complete confusion. But then a week into that, I started to settle down and, reflect and realize that, this, is probably an opportunity for us to reorganize and re-evaluate the speed at which we are working, how everything else is going. But it has also presented us a very good opportunity to communicate, just to sit down and really and talk. I've been talking a lot with the farm families in Uganda. They call me all the time, and we are, they're trying to understand, because, in Uganda, the women are in the rural areas, and they do not have the same access to information. Eventually, when they hear all of a sudden everything is locked down, they don't understand what is happening anymore. So I have had the opportunity to communicate a little bit more with them and understand how they're living, because now their children are back home, and it is an additional burden to the mothers who usually the children are in boarding schools, and all of a sudden in midterm, the kids have to get back home. So they are trying to cope with lots of things aside of the disease itself, which has not impacted heavily the countryside in Africa, but there are all the other effects which are stressing the mothers a lot. And it has been a crucial moment for me to engage with them and calm and explain to them what is really going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah, wow, I can imagine that is challenging when you have, separated and isolated from so much of the world. So, kudos to you and your team for supporting so many people right now. I think in a time when so many things feel outside of our control, one of the things that is in our control is what we eat. And Rochelle, you brought up that you've seen a real interest in food as medicine, and how can we build up our immune systems and, eat things that, can maybe help strengthen us during this time. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and, what some of your favorite go-to recipes and herbs are right now?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I try to teach all of the time, but with the pandemic, all of a sudden everybody was listening. They're like, okay, now I want to know, what I have in my kitchen that can help, and what, or what I can get at the closest grocery store. Obviously food access has been really limited. So the awareness and the interest, was again really high. And I love, kitchen medicine, or just the culinary herbs and spices and ingredients that you do have, we do have more access to, that can be just as potent as any other sort of supplemental herb. And examples of that, I mean, I'll say moringa for sure. That's not something we can get at every grocery store, but I mean, that's obviously nearly a perfect food. But stuff like ginger and garlic and really all of the spices, any fresh herbs, we think of oregano and parsley and thyme and cilantro, those they're medicines, and those are the ones I would hang my hat on too, garlic, ginger every day, those high volatile oil, fresh herbs, and it's an opportunity to kind of remember that and try new recipes, and I think can lay the foundation for a food practice that can continue afterward, and that can lower the need for additional healthcare sometimes, if we're able to be consuming foods that are reinforcing our immunity and our energy. And the stat that I like best that sort of illustrates the potential of that is, I think it's 80% of the world relies on food and herbs as a primary form of healthcare. It's substantial. So.
Yeah, no, this is not new, right? This is what a lot of the world has been doing forever and continues to do.
Yeah.
And I'm curious along those lines, Pamela. Certainly, I know from some of my time spent in Africa and in Uganda that there are many places where it's harder to get traditional forms of medicine. So can you talk a little bit about what this concept is food as medicine maybe looks like in rural Uganda?
Yes, Lisa, I think that, what has been very nice to discover now is going back to what we call indigenous knowledge. It is going, I have actually been able to learn probably a lot more because, talking about moringa as a food packed with micronutrients, I'm getting all sorts of information now coming up and people giving testimonies that, we children especially, we suffer from malnutrition because we've had that issue for a long time. But that is because our economies and our knowledge has been distorted since the introduction of modern medicine. You have to know that there's been all the use of natural products, the use of herbal botanical herbs. Most of that was abandoned, and that is only resurfacing now. I was actually watching a short video that somebody put on Facebook in Uganda, and it was just amazing because they were using a combination of botanical herbs, boiling it in water, covering their heads and bending over it, and this allows them to breathe in all the phytochemicals in the herbs that is going to open their lungs and kill the infectious diseases. So all of this knowledge that all of a sudden started coming out. I think that it was, we actually learned a lot. We have not been able to document it, but this is something that should be documented going forward, because the younger generation do not know this. So you find that the older people are coming up with this, and especially the use of moringa now, it's both for nutritional purposes, for curing diseases. We've had people saying, they're much healthier right now when they eat a higher quantity of moringa. What happened now during the lockdown, there's been a breakdown in the distribution chains. That means the foods that are usually distributed into various areas, but are not, some things that are not produced in one area, and they are not arriving in the new areas anymore. The producers of moringa are using more of the moringa as a vegetable, so it's cooked as a vegetable. They drink it as a tea. The moringa powder is added into porridge for children. So there's a whole spectrum of the consumption of this of moringa now, but it is impacting positively immediately on the health of the people. It's beautiful to learn that from the indigenous people whom we usually think do not know or do not understand a lot about the nutrients or the phytochemicals in the herbs.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. Thank you. That's great to hear people are doing more of that, paying more attention, and the younger generation is starting to learn that. And interesting, you sort of bring up the phytochemicals in the plants at the end, because we happen to have this amazing scientist on the call who studies phytochemicals in plants. Carrie, I don't know if everyone on the call knows what phytochemicals mean. Can you start there, and then can you talk a little bit about plants as medicine, and particularly when it comes to energy and immunity, how can plants provide that?
Sure. So yeah, phyto meaning plant, and then chemistry meaning chemical. So plants, just like all of us, you can think of macromolecules, so fat, protein, and carbohydrates. So all the plants make that and have that, but then they also produce, those are kind of the primary compounds, and then they make secondary compounds or metabolites. So they metabolize and make these other compounds. And a lot of those are made to protect the plants. So if you think about it, plants, evolved long before we were around, and they were faced with stress from the environment, from growing, from competition next to them, from UV rays. And they were also, facing attacks by insects, attacks by viruses and bacteria and other pathogens. So they evolved these compounds because as a plant, you can't run away like you would, if a lion's chasing you. So they make these compounds as their defense. So they're sometimes called secondary defense compounds. So when you hear about plants being antioxidant and protecting, they're making those compounds because they're constantly out in the sunlight and they need UV protection. And so a lot of these like antiviral compounds, the plants make them for themselves to protect themselves. And then if we consume them, then we take advantage of those chemical defenses. So that's kind of where it's at. And, what Rachel said about all of these herbs, they all possess a lot of these amazing traits. I think and moringa is just kind of unique in that it's a bit more dense than a lot of other plants. So the levels are a bit higher. What also is really interesting is when you dry things, right? So moringa powder is sometimes consumed dried. So then those phytochemicals, if it's processed well and the quality is maintained, you really even concentrate them further. And I think that's particularly interesting when you're talking about food security as well, because it literally is, a jar on your shelf. It's, it's almost part of a survival kit kind of food. So whether you're in the US or whether you're anywhere in the world, you have this nutrient dense powder. So that's to me also a fascinating part of it. What gets tricky is, how you process it and how you cook it and how to maximize on those benefits. But there's a long history of phytochemicals being used and made into actual pharmaceutical drugs. Like aspirin is from the willow bark tree, so traditionally used to treat fevers. Artemisinin is the top anti-malarial drug. Taxol is one of the best breast cancer drugs, and that was from the Pacific yew tree. So this natural products chemistry is really, to me, a really fascinating field to kind of learn what plants have utilized to protect themselves, and how it's cool when we consume them, we then protect ourselves.
I love that idea of plants not being able to run away, so they put out these phytochemicals instead. Thank you, Carrie. I think one of the points you made that's really important is just on the integrity of the processing. And I know we started to get a bunch of questions in the Q&A of like, how's moringa processed and how do you maintain that? How do you make sure it's good? And thankfully, we have an amazing woman who runs a whole organization that processes tons and tons of moringa every day. So Pamela, can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like? And I think maybe even just describing like from the tree to what shows up in Whole Foods, what does that look like?
Yeah, moringa is quite delicate, and it has to be handled very carefully within very short periods of time. So what we do usually, first of all, it takes about 4 months to the first harvest, and it's a tree that is fantastic for the environment because it's always green. You cut the moringa leaves and they always grow back just like immediately. But, from the time the moringa is harvested, it has to be handled extremely carefully, and it has to be dried from the harvest time to the period to start the drying. Maximum 2 hours have to pass, not more than 2 hours. The reason being that, moringa starts to decompose very quickly the moment it is not put to dry immediately. And so we are very strict with our processes from the harvest, and we dry it in a dark environment, warm and dark, because in order not to be impacted by the UV rays. So we dry immediately the moringa. From the drying, we go immediately into the grinding. And after grinding the moringa, we pack it. So within the first 24 hours, we've completed the full cycle of processing moringa. There's nothing else that is added into it. And that process, which is quite fast, actually enables the moringa to keep all of its benefits, all the nutrients intact. There's no time for it to start discoloring, because the moment moringa is in contact with air, it starts to discolor it very quickly. And that means it's losing most of its beneficial benefits, most of the nutritional benefits. And so it took us quite a while to understand that process, but now we understand it perfectly well, and it is a very fast moving exercise and requires a lot of work, going into it. That's why we managed to deliver to Kuli Kuli an excellent quality of moringa.
And we so appreciate that, and it is a ton of work. I mean, if anybody who's seen a tree, it's these tiny little leaves that you're taking, you're washing, you're drying. It is a labor of love, absolutely.
Yes.
So, I'm curious, Rochelle, you started to talk a bit about, these amazing plants with the phytochemicals and the ginger and the herbs and things. Do you have any go-to recipes or things that are, top of mind for you right now in this sort of energy and immunity space?
Yes. Let's see. I think one of the things that I've been making most often and that people are most excited about, and it's the easiest, is just like a ginger concentrate. So basically ginger shots. And all you have to do is take, like a palm of ginger and blend it with about a quart of water, and then you strain it, and you have a quart of concentrated ginger juice. And you can just take shots. You can, mix it with your water, with your tea, with, sparkling water, anything you want. So that I've been relying on pretty heavily. I'm a big fan of blended soups, and those can be cooked or raw. But again, I'm not complicated in the kitchen. It's like if I can put a bunch of things in a pot and simmer, or a bunch of things in a blender and blend. So there's a really nice cucumber soup recipe that I actually told somebody to put moringa in last week. So that works. And there's a lot of garlic in that recipe, and it's raw garlic, which is nice. So you're getting something that you don't get necessarily if you're cooking the garlic. And again, it takes 5 minutes to make. So I'm happy to, share those with you afterward, or it's a little, difficult to talk through all the steps, but, and then of course, drinking teas, drink teas, eat the medicine, drink the teas, that's pretty foundational. So hopefully that helps.
That's awesome. And we did have one very quick question, and please, audience, continue to put in questions on, is there a benefit to cayenne in the ginger shots? I'm very curious about.
Yeah. I almost mentioned cayenne earlier when I was listing off some of the kitchen medicines, but yeah, all the spices and the spicy spices, peppers and chilies and that sort of thing can be especially helpful for immunity. So cayenne, you know, it's great in the ginger. It's great in anything. Yeah.
Very cool. Amazing. So Pamela, I know when we visited in Uganda, we had a videographer follow you around to these amazing cooking demonstrations that you were doing with other women in the community, showing them how to use moringa and showing them how to use other herbs and really make nutritious meals. So can you tell us a little more about that and some of the recipes that you've been cooking up?
Well, I use moringa in lots of things. I use the leaves, fresh leaves directly as a vegetable on its own. In Uganda, our tradition is that we add a lot of groundnut sauce. I believe that in the US you call it peanut, and this pure groundnuts. So we add that directly into the vegetables. We add moringa leaves directly onto any stew-based sauce, like, you know, fish. We make fish with stew. We cook beef, smoked beef in. We prepare in stew. So we add lots of stuff like that in the meat and in the fish, and all have the moringa as vegetables themselves. But more important than anything else is the moringa powder we use for children particularly, and it's added into the porridge. Almost every Ugandan child takes porridge for breakfast. Now, whether that is porridge made from corn or from millet or from oats, they take porridge for breakfast. And we've discovered now adding moringa in the porridge directly is a great support to the children. We remember that most of the children in Africa, actually, in Uganda in particular, many children in the rural areas usually end up just with 1 meal or 2 meals a day. And that is the situation that's happening until now. That means it is fundamental for them to have a proper quantity of nutrients in their breakfast before going to school. There are some schools that provide school meals. We are now trying to encourage some of the schools to get to provide, to use moringa in the school meals. But again, not too many of those. Now, other recipes that I've used moringa, I use moringa powder to make lasagna. So that's like lasagna with pesto. Instead of using the pesto, I use moringa powder, and I add in pine nuts, and I add in Parmesan cheese, and, you know, with the bechamel sauce. I'm going to share that with you, Lisa, very soon.
Please, we all want to see that.
Now, a drink that I love to make every morning, it's called liver flash. So I put pineapples, garlic, some water, and moringa powder, and I put it in a food processor, and this is amazing fast thing in the morning. Yeah, so I love to apply to use moringa. I'm trying a number of recipes now, developing new recipes that we shall be sharing very soon.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Those all sound incredible. Thank you. Carrie, I am so curious, as a mother and as somebody with all this amazing understanding of phytochemicals and the nutrients plants bring, what are your go-to recipes to, you know, boost your energy and immunity for yourself and your son right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm one of those bad scientists where I don't always practice what I preach, but and I have been doing a lot of ginger, and actually I do sometimes use a bit of grain alcohol, like a vodka as well, partly just to strictly for the extraction purposes, but more. So we've been doing that. I like, and then smoothies are, you know, really easy, especially with a kid. You know, you can get a little moringa powder in there. I've been making some interesting moringa spirulina ones, and you can get a really cool blue color. So I'm trying, you know, it's really about the rainbow. Like, just the more colors we eat, it's probably the healthier. It's really that simple. For moringa powder too, I like it fresh, but if I have it powdered, I prefer it as more of a savory flavor. So on popcorn, I really like it with maybe a little nutritional yeast and salt. Nutritional yeast has B12, which is soda spirulina, which is very hard to get as a vegan. I'm not vegan, but I know some of the people on the panel might be. So So those are really good sources for those. And then, yeah, popcorn's probably my favorite. And then sometimes I, just have it and we'll sprinkle it on at the end. I like it with eggs as well. So a lot of it is, yeah, trying these things, but also kind of finding a balance of not worrying about it too much. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I do drink coffee, and can sometimes run on that for a bit. And when you start to feel it, it's like, oh, I need that nutrition. I mean, our brains really do need, a source of almost glucose to be functioning well. So you would think you'd eat more normally working from home, but I've heard from several people that the day seems to go by and these scheduled things change. Or again, I just want to add that I think there can be this added pressure to cook more or to do things, or you hear from your friend, it's like, the best recipe, and you might be overwhelmed with other things. So again, to kind of have sympathy, have compassion, and whether you try out a new recipe or not, like, I think there's an emotional sense of immunity as well, so just, be like, yeah, I'm going to try a smoothie, but I don't have to go on a liquid diet for a month, or something like that, where there's just a bit of, again, compassion, and trying fun things out, and taking it as an advantage to try new foods and new experiments and stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I'm curious about one thing you said where you're like, sometimes I drink coffee all the time and then I'm like, oh, maybe I need energy from other places. Can you talk a little bit about like how nutrition provides energy? Because I think a lot of us think of, oh, we need an energy, we need a huge shot of caffeine, but that's maybe not the best way to get energy all the time.
Yeah, I mean, caffeine is triggering these receptors, so it's a real like fired response. But for all of our function, for metabolism, for comprehension in the brain, for neural function, you need glucose and you need your amino acids, which is also unique about moringa, is that you get these other players that are involved in cellular transfer, like even just right at the cellular level, there's pumps and there's potassium, and a lot of these work in tandem. So you kind of want to have a balance of those nutrients. And we're so resilient that we can kind of abuse our bodies quite a bit, without eating well and you don't really notice it. It's a very subtle thing until you start to improve your diet. Or I also practice yoga, and I go a couple days without yoga, and you just don't know what quite is off. And as you start to add in those, healthier foods and nutrients, the systems just start to operate better, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that point on self-care, because, I think that is something that everyone is thinking a lot about right now. And, as we talked about at the beginning, with women shouldering so much more of the childcare and housework responsibility, it is increasingly important that we take care of ourselves. And so I'm curious, just, on a personal note, what self-care looks like to each of you. So maybe Pamela, if you want to comment a bit about that as an entrepreneur and flying all over the world, how do you engage in self-care?
I think it's just, to be conscious really about how much stress from work and pressure can impact on us very negatively. And I think that in my case, I'm very intentional about it. For instance, I just make sure that I have enough hydration every day. And it's during this COVID lockdown period now, I just took a note and I wrote it and stuck it on my,
No problem. You're a busy woman. You got people calling you from all over the world, I'm sure.
So I took a note and I wrote in my fridge that I should not eat snacks. So help me God. And that has helped me a lot, because every time I go to open the fridge when I'm bored, I read it. So I stop there and I think, it's not that I don't eat snacks at all, but it has allowed me to discipline myself, because that's a commitment I made for myself, and I can discipline myself and say, I'm not gonna eat any of the unnecessary snacks, which is very easy to do these days. But what's helping me a lot, because I'm a lover of herbal tea. So in a day, I take maybe 2-3 cups of moringa herbal tea, and I take ginger tea, and I take hibiscus tea, and I take ashwagandha. So I'm taking almost 2 liters of different types of herbal tea per day. Obviously, it helps me a lot. Prayers help my mind a lot. I'm a very prayerful person. So that is a way also of taking care of myself. I'm taking walks once a day, half hour's walk, or meditation. I'm doing a lot of meditation as well. So I've kind of lumped up a number of things that I was not doing regularly before, but that is because I realized the lockdown was creating that sensation which I was not accepting it. I couldn't accept it. I'm worried what's going to happen to the business if we don't, continue producing, if all the supply chains are locked down, the products are going to get spoiled and so on. So lots of things going on in the mind at the same time. And this lockdown has helped a lot to reflect and allowed also to slow down. And I think that going forward, I know that at the end of the day, everything can actually work without running too much, as long as, I take my tea, I do my meditation, do my prayer, work out, and work. That's, yeah.
Yeah, taking care of the body so that you can take care of the world. I love that. Those are great tips. I'm going to put a sticky note on my fridge right after this. Rochelle, you are, amazing at this. You coach other people on wellness and self-care, and your Instagram has become one of my go-to places to find cool tips and tricks. Curious about how you think of self-care yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that list there that Pamela just mentioned that pretty much covered it. But I do practice what I preach. I care a lot about nutrition and what I eat, and that is always the most important thing. I do meal prep most week. Well, I would say every week, to ensure that I have, a lot of food ready, and I totally sympathize with the pressure to be cooking more meals and this and that. And also that is not always realistic. We need to sneak in lunch or breakfast or whatever it is. So preparing foods ahead of time, doing the best with, access to produce. We just discovered a local community garden nearby, and that's been, every week we go now and get some of that. I practically live in an apothecary, so I take a lot of herbs. I don't think everyone has to, but I definitely have, it's just surrounded by it now. So it's like, lots of ashwagandha, lots of nervines for nervous system. And then physical exercise is absolutely imperative for me. I would say nutrition and physical movement are just absolutely, highest priorities. I like to run and I like yoga. So thankfully, those are two things that, I can do without a gym or without, equipment. So trying to do that every day. It's more a matter of, right now, it's more a matter of me telling myself not to run every day and like save my joints for the future. But, if the weather's nice, it's really worth it. So those are some of the things.
Great list as well. Carrie, curious if you have anything to add to that list, and also curious, just, I know you have a young son, and so trying to keep him healthy and keep your sanity at the same time. I'd love for you to comment on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's personally been, the last 5 years I've been funded on this research grant on moringa. So we were actually in Kenya for 2 years and got back to the US last fall. So it's been a big adjustment for me coming back into the US, and then my grant is set to end in July. So I'm currently looking for jobs and looking for more grant funding opportunities. So the work stress has been quite high. And then to be told, you have to now homeschool your child, it's quite a lot on the table. And, it's just not always successful, but you do the best you can. I would say exercise and yoga are really important, not just for me, but for him. I find also that the kids just really need, you know, our bodies were not designed to sit all day, you know, and I think finding that balance of exercise and intake too can change depending on your age. But if you are more sedentary, you don't necessarily need as many calories, but yet now we're in our homes next to the fridge and next to all the snacks. So, you know, kind of having that, that new relationship, I think, with just that access. But yeah, exercise, and then also, you know, sleep obviously is another really crucial thing that I think has been kind of under talked about in terms of health. And you know, people say I'm fine on 6 hours, but to me, I've read through studies and there really is no evidence for anything less than 8 hours. So whether you have to, you know, again, it's kind of pushing through, and I'll have days where I don't do yoga and I don't eat that well, and I maybe stay up late, but then I make sure that that doesn't go on for more than a day or two where I get back into it. Or I'll have a few days where I really focus on my son and his online learning and helping. And then, so it's this, you know, a bit of juggling. And so I really, you know, I feel for people who are out of work, looking for work, dealing with their kids and trying to kind of hold it together a bit, you know, and just, you know, realizing that kids are in a pretty new situation. And I think online learning is challenging. And how do you keep them, you know, eating well and stuff. I saw one comment is, you know, my kids are picky eaters and they won't eat. I think like with moringa, part of it maybe is the color too. So if you can get some other foods that kind of maybe hide the color a bit, that could be, you know, brownies, maybe use less sugar, use yogurt instead, or like a spaghetti sauce too. So, you know, and cooking is therapy, music is therapy. I dance a lot. I've been taking these movement classes where, you know, you're really swaying side to side and doing the snake and bringing up a lot of these kind of primal movements in the connective tissue and soft tissue. And it's just also fun. Like, I think as moms, we have so much responsibility and we have to be silly, and you have to call your girlfriends and laugh and make jokes about things. And humor is medicine, you know, as well.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you, Carrie. Well, I know we have a lot of questions from the audience, which is great. And please keep putting them in that little Q&A box. But one last question for the three of you. So this, you know, this pandemic is unprecedented. We haven't had anything like it in at least 100 years. And I think a lot of people are speculating about what society post-coronavirus will look like. And I'm curious if each of you could comment on what your hopes are for the ways that we'll emerge out of this better in, you know, any way possible. So Pamela, do you want to start with that?
I think one thing about the COVID-19, it has really made us understand that we are a global village. We are a global community. What affects one person in one part of the world is definitely going to affect another person in the other part of the world. And I believe that many people have been questioning, you know, our actions, our running, because we have now come face to face with death. If you know, if you listen to the news, and it's so disheartening, and that gives us a moment to stop and think and ask ourselves, is it worth it? You know, all the stress and all the running and damaging the environment and so on. You know, we are not having time to talk to our neighbors, you know, to say hello to people, to sit down and have a proper meal with your family. So I think that we are going to be revisiting our core values and understand that, you know, running after money, which is basically the thing here in our international global community today, we're probably going to sit down and think a little bit more and say, you know, what do we need to build in terms of human relationships? Because if we don't put human relationships at the core of our very being, we get disoriented. And I think that the COVID-19 for me, it's brought me back to contact, you know, to emotional contact with everybody around me. And I think that's the take home for me. I believe I'm gonna just like change always my attitude, be more aware, more attentive to other people. You know, it goes from something as simple as always saying hello, you know, and you need help, and you know, express yourself, have a laugh, and so on. So yeah, it's brought us together, I think.
Beautiful, thank you. Rochelle, how about your hopes for what we look like post-pandemic?
Yeah. Well, that was beautifully said, Pamela. Definitely agree there. I hope that similarly, in terms of us sort of being forced into new essentials, new basics, new priorities, you know, and the awareness of health being heightened and it becoming, you know, much more real, that we can have, as she said, this brush with death, you know, or I hope that we are able to learn some of the essentials of self-care and health and preventative medicine, which is really about, you know, what I mean is just like food and sleep and water and like these basics that add up over time to, you know, the blue zones and living the longest and like really, you know, being well. I hope that by being sort of reduced to them, that's what I was looking for, we're able to maintain them going forward, you know, having an experience of practicing them and then being able to continue them. And I would like to be optimistic that that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Carrie, last but not least.
Sure. You know, I mean, as a scientist, when I read things about, you know, predictions on food security, both globally and in the US, it is, these problems were already around, you know, I mean, we've been fighting hunger and kind of the double burden of where you have, you know, nutritional issues and then obesity and diabetes. And these problems are, you know, set to be amplified, and all of the goals, the UN Sustainability Development Goals, all of those issues are amplified. And so I hope that this is an opportunity then to see their importance, to see how poverty and health are connected, how access to information is important, and this empowerment to take on, you know, to be more empowered about your own health. And I think particularly for women and for their households, that's vital. On a very personal level, I am, you know, I'm passionate about moringa, and as much as I'm also, because I'm a scientist, I'm critical, and I don't say that it cures diseases or is this miracle plant. I also think it's really useful, and I want more clinical data. So there's a lot of research funding that's coming out to address COVID-19 and its repercussions in terms of food security. So I am writing grants to get funding to look particularly at people with pre-existing conditions and diabetes, and all. We see how important that is in your risk factors of getting these other things. You know, your body is already compromised, the inflammatory response is already elevated, and then you pack on something else. It's really challenging for the body. So I think addressing those pre-existing conditions, and you know, it's a major issue. Diabetes, obesity, these things are all, you know, so I'm hoping it just is not like, oh no, it's getting worse. It's more like, wow, this is really important. And even if you look at it from an economic standpoint, there's such a, you know, a return on investment for investing in nutrition. I mean, the organization Global Alliance for International Nutrition Gain is amazing. Lawrence Haddock, who's the founder, has written profound things about this. You know, if you're fed and well nourished, you function better in the workforce, you provide to a better society. So those things, there are economic returns to, you know, this social benefit and bringing everyone up. So I think we all need to see opportunities here, you know, and help those who really need help, you know.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Well, I want to make sure we get through some of these audience questions. So I'll group a couple of them together. There were a couple of folks who said, you know, they find that it's challenging to eat moringa and some of the other, you know, more high phytochemical, nutrient-rich plants, and wanted tips on, you know, should you start with smaller amounts and work your way up, or what's the best way to do that? So, and any recommendations on dosage levels as well was one of the questions. Maybe Carrie, give us a science, and we'll jump around. So popcorn style here.
Yeah, so I mean, generally, you know, anywhere from a teaspoon to a tablespoon of the powder is kind of what's recommended. If you are having some issues, and people do, I'd say eat it with other foods, you know, don't just drink it as on an empty stomach. That can usually help with the digestion, and just start with a smaller amount. That's what I've seen, and you might be able to, you know, get used to it. But I also would say, like, it's not, you know, it's not for everyone necessarily. So don't force yourself if you're feeling like it's not working. But I would say, yeah, adding it to food is probably the best way.
Awesome. And
I wanted to add on there that I saw somebody mention putting it in chimichurri, and I know Pamela mentioned the pesto. I think that a lot of times we think of herbs as having to go, for whatever reason, having to go into sweeter things like beverages, you know, turmeric lattes or smoothies or that kind of thing, but putting it into savory dishes, or like Carrie just mentioned, you know, into a full meal, you know, can really help it not be such a feature.
And along those lines, Rochelle, there was a question specifically about ginger and garlic and some of the herbs for good health, that it's really hard to give those to kids. Any tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that case, it might have to be much smaller quantities, or just different plants, you know, different things that a kid's palate is going to tolerate. And, you know, if it's not raw garlic or spicy food, maybe it's some parsley, or maybe it's some mint, you know, mint tea even. Chamomile is a really good one for kids. You know, you get different benefits from different plants, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the pungent ones. I mean, a lot of times the pungency is part of the medicine. I won't go there because Carrie can take that, but you know, so that is something to keep in mind. But smaller quantities are different options. Yeah.
And then just going to the other side of the spectrum for elderly women, we had a question on that. And on taking moringa and other medicinal plants.
What was the question? Just
any special advice for elderly women?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's perfect. My mother is almost 80 years old, and she's been on moringa, taking moringa tea every day. And if you take it in the quantities of, as Carrie said, 1 teaspoon of powder to 1 tablespoon of powder in a day, it's just perfect. It's giving you probably the equivalent amount of, you know, the vegetable needs that you need for a day. So for elderly people, it's perfect. Actually, it works very well. It's best taken in tea. I just add, you know, for children, we add it also in milk directly, or milk with cereal, and makes it sweeter. Actually, moringa makes the milk get a sweeter kind of taste. So the children take it very well. But for elderly, in simple tea, it's amazing. They love it. It's love.
And then 2 last rapid fire questions. I think this one's for you, Carrie. Does moringa provide energy? That's a question.
Yeah, I mean, okay, it depends what you mean by energy, but energy really means calories, right? So if it's, yes, it provides a little bit depending on how much you eat, because there's protein and carbohydrates. But then in terms of feeling energized, you know, you are getting all these phytonutrients and the amino acids and the vitamins. So it allows again, proper metabolism, proper function in the body. So you can feel a bit more, better vigor, I would say. But this isn't really, it's kind of it's a looser term that I would say isn't always studied there. When you see a scientific study on energy, it'll be like people who did a recovery after doing an exercise or something like that, where you can actually measure some of those markers. So again, a lot more clinical work needs to be done specifically with moringa, I think, on a lot of these issues, again, with, immunity and inflammation, and energize. But I would say take it and see how you feel. I talk to people who feel like they don't need coffee anymore because they drink it, and other people who, it's still just, it's more of just a food that they eat as a vegetable. So yeah, now's the time to try.
Yeah, and I know we're at the hour here, but Pamela, there were a couple questions, and just, a big thank you from the audience for being such a great female role model for young girls and women in Uganda. Folks want to know, how is your supply chain being disrupted? Are you still able to harvest and process moringa? What, if anything, can folks do?
The lockdown has completely disrupted the supply chain in the sense that, there's no more movement of transportation. Usually moringa has to be, we transport the moringa by, right from the farm. People are not allowed to move anymore to transport any kind of goods into our storage and our processing facilities. And the impact of COVID generally has been that, there have been no containers. Most of the goods are moved by sea freight when we export them. And there have been no containers moving at all from anywhere. So it's been a complete standstill on the movement of any kind of goods. That's been terrible. The good thing about the moringa farmers, of course, they're not harvesting anything right now. And the moringa is just on the trees, but sooner or later, we're hoping that that opens up again. It's the transportation of goods, which is the biggest issue that we faced.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I know there are further questions from the audience. We had a lot of great questions and such a great discussion. Very briefly, how can people get in touch with you, follow you, support your work? Pamela?
Yes, I can give my contact email. I'm on Facebook as Pamela Anyoti Peronaci, or you can find us through the Asante Mama Facebook page. And Lisa, it's okay, I can share my general email, which is info@asantemama.com. Asante Mama is spelled ASANTEMAMA.com.
Thank you. And Carrie, if there are, ways people can follow or support your research or what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. I'm trying to be a better, social networker. I'm also trying to launch more of a website soon that will have more information on moringa. And we are hoping to get funded on a project in California that will help promote production and consumption of California, and would then network people interested in moringa within the state. So hopefully I can send that your way and you can send it out, or people can reach out to me.
Yeah, we'll send that out. And Rochelle, last but not least?
Yeah, Instagram, as you mentioned, is great, Rochelle Robinette, and then everything is on my website also, rochellerobinette.com. You can find the cafe and the store and coaching and everything there.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. This was a wonderful discussion. I feel so inspired, and I'm sure our audience feels it as well. Thank you so much for your time, Rochelle, Carrie, and Pamela, calling in from all different parts of the world. And thank you all to our over 50 participants that joined us today. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye.